stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day.
Hello, welcome back to Against the Grain. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm your host, Gary King, and tonight I'm excited to introduce you to one of the guests of the Telepathy tapes, school teacher from the UK called Jes Kerzen. She's an author of a book called A Mind Beyond Words, where she details her 25-year experience with one of her students called Asha. Now, before we begin, I want to mention that Jes and Asha are not their real names. They've chosen to use pseudonyms to protect their identities and privacy. However, despite their use of pseudonyms, the experiences and insights that Jes is about to share are very real and deeply profound. Jes is a passionate advocate for children with unique communication needs, particularly those on the autism spectrum. Her journey into this world has been deeply personal and transformative, especially through her experiences with Asha, whose story challenges many conventional ideas about communication, perception, and human potential. Jes's insights into telepathy and the subtle, often overlooked ways in which we connect with one another open up profound questions about the nature of consciousness itself. Her experiences push the boundaries of what we typically understand about human interaction, shedding light on the roles that so-called outliers in society may play in our collective evolution. In this conversation, we explore Jes's remarkable journey of awakening to telepathic communication, the challenges of sharing such experiences in a skeptical world, and the deeper spiritual truths that may lie beyond the limits of language. So settle in as we dive into a discussion that promises to stretch the imagination and invite us all to reconsider what it truly means to connect. So let's dive straight into it. I know you're going to love this conversation. Please welcome Jes Kerzen. Hello, Jes. Thanks very much for joining me this evening.
Hello, Gary. It's lovely to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
It's nice to hear your voice in person. Actually, I've listened to it obviously on the Telepathy tapes, and it was nice to hear. You know, it's American voices are American voices, but it's nice to hear a voice that's sort of close to home that, you know, reminds you of, like, you know, you definitely sound like a teacher, or you know, that sort of what the stereotype that you have when you grow up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes. You have people like me telling you to sit down, boy.
Sit down now. Yeah, behave. Exactly. Yeah, it's that sort of.
I never did that.
No, I'm sure you didn't. No. Okay. So as you know now, I've interviewed several mums, and I've recently interviewed Diane. I've been sort of, as you know, I'm a crop circle researcher. I've been a sort of crop circle researcher for almost 30 years, like 28 years now. I've done loads of stuff on that, and so that sort of put me out in the fringes, as it were, you know, as someone that people like to say believed in them, but you know, I like to think it's more than that. But when I heard the telepathy tapes, there was this overwhelming sense for me of these children being heard, of them being recognised, and them being acknowledged as, you know, not just in there and we didn't realise, but not only that, but that they're really, really, really special people. And then it goes on to say, okay, this is something which I think, and I really do think, that is sort of leading the way to our evolution, is leading the way to the way that we have to go as a species. Now, I haven't had the opportunity to read your book yet. It's something that I'm going to do. I've got a pile of books already. I've been very kindly sent the books from all the mums that I've interviewed, so I've got loads of catching up to do with reading. But let me start with asking you, what initially drew you to working with autistic children?
Synchronicity, I suppose, is the short word.
Okay.
I hadn't intended to work with anything other than mainstream primary. I started my career teaching primary schools, middle schools all around the country, and took a career break to have my children. And after I'd had 3 children, it was quite a long career break. And so I just started getting back into supply teaching, where you just stand in for a week or two for somebody who's off sick. And I was in a sort of bank of supply teachers, and I'd go into different schools and just do a bit of a baptism by fire, but I would do just a few days in these schools. And then one day I got a phone call from an old friend of mine who happened to work in a local school. And she said, we need a supply teacher, and you are the supply teacher we need. I said, okay, what age group? And she said, oh, they're little, they're only 5 to 7 year olds. So I said, all right, okay, can manage that. She said, oh, it's a specialist class, though. It's got children with speech and language difficulties. And so they've all got statements of special educational needs. They're all taxied in from all around the county because they are the most severe children that we have. And although it's a mainstream setting, you'll be working with the speech and language therapist and with a full-time teaching assistant, and you'll only have 10 kids in the class, but a lot of them don't speak, or they only speak a little bit, or you can't really understand what they're saying, and others of them don't really understand what you're saying to them, so they've got receptive problems, and they're all different. And I mean, they didn't say anything about autism. In fact, I think one of the rules for this class was that they weren't supposed to have that as a primary diagnosis, but
Okay.
an awful lot of them were.
Right.
So I was absolutely horrified, and I said, oh, I can't do that. How am I going to teach children if they can't understand me and I can't understand them? No, get someone else. And she said, no, you're the person. She said, you are the right person. And so she really nagged, really went on at me, and this is weird, but I went along, took a look, absolutely fell in love with these little people, and just thought I might be winging it to start with, but I'll do my best. I'll see what I can do to help them as best I can. And it was only for 3 weeks. I thought, well, I can lag my way through 3 weeks of it. And then the teacher I was replacing at the end of the term decided she was still not well enough to come back. And so could I stay on for another few weeks? And then it was another few weeks. And then it went on and on and on and on until I'd been there for, gosh, I must have been there over a term, I think, until she finally went to a doctor and decided she wasn't well enough to go back and she was going to take early retirement. So by that time, I was completely in love with the job. I was actually learning how to deal with these kids and what to, I didn't know all the answers, but I was getting there, and I was, feeling all right with it. And then, so the head teacher called me in, and she had this sort of specialist advisor with her who I'd met several times, who was the county advisor for speech and language problems. And she was a very high up lady, very wise lady. And they're both sitting there with little smiles on their faces and invited me into the office. And so she explained that the job would now be advertised because the teacher had taken retirement. And so I said, well, could I apply for it? They said, no, you can't apply for this. And I sort of went, oh, I was a bit gutted. So I said, oh, well, is there a problem? And they said, well, yeah, this is a specialist post and we need someone with at least a diploma, if not a degree, in speech and language acquisition to do it as a full-time post. And so I said, oh, I see, okay. And then there was this little pause and this little smile between the two of them. And then the advisor said, Birmingham University do a distance learning course in this, and it would take you a year to do a diploma in it, but you could do it on a distance learning basis. So you'd have to attend, a few seminars there, but most of them would be in county. You'd be sort of nearer to home. And if you can get a diploma, then let's just say you'd be seriously considered for the position. And until that time, of course, you can carry on as a supply teacher. So I sort of thought about it for about 2 minutes and then thought, this is what I want to do. And so I said, I'm in. So I'd got 3 little kids of my own, and well, they weren't that little by then, but one of them was, and a full-time job working in this class, and I was doing a distance learning degree as well. It started as a diploma, and I got so hooked on it, I went on and did the degree. So it was 2 years further studying, yeah.
Wow.
And by the time I'd done all that, I started, I found that the job had become mine. I got the job, and then they said, "Oh, we want you to be the head of the whole unit," because there was a class for older children as well, and we want you to sort of run the whole shebang. So it was like, oh, okay. so that's how I got into working with those children, Gary.
That's pretty incredible, Jess, isn't it? So I mean, and so what did the degree entail? What was the training? Summarize it for me.
Basically, it was the idea that these children's brains were not functioning the way children's brains should be functioning, and therefore we had to make them right.
Make them right.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't put that crudely, but that was the idea then, that with loads of drilling and practicing and making different sounds and using those every day and incorporating sign language into all of our lessons, so that ones who didn't understand very well was picking up that the words and the signing you were doing corresponded. So if they were very visual learners, they could watch the way your hands were flapping about and they'd start to pick up that you were trying to make some sense to them. And so we learned all of these different skills. I had to do some case studies, which of course was very easy for me because I've got 10 little subjects on hand. And just studying. The degree was called the Philosophy of Education or something, a big fill. But there was some philosophy in there. There was a lot of psychology in there. A lot of it was quite behaviourist. And that's what we were taught. And the remit was basically that we got those children to speak and understand as clearly as possible so that they could be moved into a mainstream class, which was an awful lot cheaper than being in our unit, which was costing an absolute fortune.
Sure. And was it a reward-based system like some of the mums are talking about, sort of a B.F. Skinner kind of, I can't remember the term, is it ABA method or something?
Something like that. I mean, it wasn't quite like that because these children, they weren't complete non-speakers. They maybe had problems with the muscles in their mouths so they couldn't move their mouths and palate and jaw and everything well enough to be able to make the sounds. They could maybe make some sounds, but not others. And others of them, I had one little girl who just memorised a load of scripts. I think Katie was talking about Houston doing something like that when he was young. This little girl used to memorise Disney films, and she used to use little quotes from that to cover for the fact that she couldn't put a sentence together to save her life. But she sort of used, I've never understood how that works, but
no,
she was so good at it that it actually needed her parents to point out to me what she was doing, because sometimes her answers seemed a little bit off and they had this American accent to them. She was a little English girl. But there was, that was how she got by and how she managed to respond to people. She'd suddenly come out like Princess somebody or the other in a Disney film and just say whatever that person would say. Yeah.
So, and in my conversation with Diane, it, she said that the two parts of the brain, the ones related to motor skills, is completely different to the one that's related to comprehension. And this is where, this notion that they couldn't understand what was going on around them is still completely wrong, really, because they can't speak. So when did you first then, from that experience, meet Asher?
I must have been doing that job for about 7 years before he entered the class, yeah. We had quite a fast turnover because we were under tremendous pressure they were sort of checked every term, and as soon as a child was deemed able to go into mainstream with a bit of support, they were out and the next one was in, because we had a waiting list as long as your arm. And so, Asher turned up in my class, and with his parents, he developed normally in terms of physical development, and academic ability was good, but he had good comprehension. He didn't have comprehension problems, but what he didn't have was any understanding of how language worked.
Right.
He had some vestigial speech. There were a lot of sounds he couldn't make. He had something called oral dyspraxia, which meant the muscles in his mouth didn't work properly. So he couldn't make a lot of sounds. So there were just, some sounds that he made, and he made a lot of substitutions. And but the whole turn-taking thing with conversation, where you ask a question and somebody replies, and you say, "How are you?" And they say, "Very well, thank you," and all the rest of that just went right over his head. He didn't really do that, and certainly the people who'd given me all the paperwork about him said that in his mainstream school, where he'd been for about a year, or getting on for a year, he just didn't interact with the other children at all. He just sat at the side of the playground and watched them, and just sat there looking very serious. And if he needed something in class, he'd do it with gesture. He'd bang his fist on the table, point at what he wanted, and some terrified little kid would hand it to him because he looked so fierce.
Did he?
Yeah. Oh, he had a real hard stare, a real Paddington Bear stare, yeah.
Did he? And would you say that's because he is like of a serious sort of personality? He's very serious about the way he sees things, or is that just the way he comes across on the outside, but it's not going on in the inside?
I don't know. He's got a cracking sense of humour, but
Has he?
Yeah, he has. But yes, but he is serious in some ways. I mean, he told me later, when he did learn to speak, because he did learn to speak, that's where he's different from a lot of the people I interviewed. He's not a non-speaker. I call him a post-speaker. He's been there and done that, and he's moved on from it.
Wow.
But we'll come to that later, perhaps.
Okay,
but,
sure.
He told me that back then he just spoke. So I said, "What did you do with yourself? You're a very bright guy. What earth did you do with yourself for those first 6 years of your life when you didn't talk to anyone?" He said, I thought.
Yeah. And in language.
Yeah.
Really?
Well, not thinking in... No, he didn't think in language. No, he didn't think in language. That was the whole point of it. His thinking wasn't linguistically based. His thinking was the sort of thinking that a newborn baby will do. They haven't got language, but they still think and they still learn. And you're a parent, I'm a parent. We know that a tiny baby is learning ridiculously fast, much faster than we do in the rest of our lives, but they're not basing it around language.
No.
My theory is that these children who go on to develop autism, particularly the ones who seem to be developing normally until they reach the point at which spoken language kicks in, and then suddenly regress to this pre-linguistic level, and everybody thinks, "Oh, we've lost them, they're all, lost to us, and they've got this terrible malfunction of their bodies." I think they've taken a look at language and thought,
Bugger that.
Don't want to do that, yeah.
Because that's been said, hasn't it? Some of them have said they make a choice.
Yeah, I'm certain they do. I'm absolutely 100% certain they do. And Asher made quite a strange choice, because he could have gone on keeping his mouth shut, but he made the choice that he actually wanted to master speech, and he worked extremely hard at it. He worked incredibly hard at it, and it did not come easy. And by the time he was 11 or 12, he was really speaking pretty fluently. He couldn't make every single sound, and his language still sounded a little bit stilted, slightly different to other people's, but he was in a mainstream class by then, and other people could understand what he was saying. He still had autistic characteristics. He found socializing quite difficult, but basically, yeah, he could get by. And he went on to get by. He went on to, master language to a very reasonable degree. He got his GCSEs and he went on and got a job after he'd left school.
Wow, fantastic.
So, yeah, he's living a semi-autonomous life now. So he's done well.
And it's Asher that really wants to keep the sort of anonymity. Is that right?
Yeah, that's why you're not seeing my face. You're seeing those wiggly lines, I'm afraid. Asher is a complicated character because when he was in his late 20s, I suppose, he found that trying to get along in normal life, which was masking the autism and coping with pretending to be an ordinary person, and the side of him that had this autistic knowing, the side of him that could access what he calls the realms and this other whole aspect of it, which is the stuff he used to share with me. He quickly learned not to share it with other people in his life because they told him he was delusional and so forth. But he and I, long after he'd left my class, we stayed very good friends. I think more or less entirely because I was absolutely fascinated with the stuff he was sharing with me, because he was obviously picking things up from somewhere way outside this world, and I couldn't get enough of it. I was fascinated by the things he had to tell me, and he really, really wanted someone to share it with. But then he said that he'd hit this point where he was cutting between the two. So he was having to act normal and suppress all of that stuff. And if he did get things coming into his head and ideas, sort of suddenly visions, he had to just put that aside, concentrate. No, I am walking to the bus stop and I'm, not going to look at any of that stuff. And then on the other side, he had this stuff coming in and he was learning to travel out of body and he'd got all this going on. And he just could not handle the two sides of himself. He said there was one side of me that was convinced I was sick and delusional, because that's what the doctor had told him when he was diagnosed. And so he said that side of me didn't want anything to do with this, just didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to think about it, just wanted to believe what the doctors were saying, that this was a delusion. And the other side of me wanted to keep exploring and keep pushing the boundaries. And so he split himself into these two halves and decided that the physical self was going to more or less cut his relationship with me, because the physical self didn't have much to talk to me about. He just wanted to get on and, with work colleagues, family, people. But the metaphysical side of him, if you like, wanted to keep that conversation going. And so that's why he reached out to me telepathically. We've always had a history of a sort of quite a strong telepathic link. And he decided that was how he was going to share his knowing, his information that he got from the realms with me. So, I've got almost two different Ashers. I've got physical Asher, who I'll maybe sort of share a WhatsApp message with a few times a week. I mean, we've been chatting earlier today. And the other side of him, which most evenings I sit down and go into a very relaxed state and connect to him, and then we'll maybe chat for an hour completely telepathically from the opposite end of the country. So, odd.
Yes. When he first reached out to you, let me ask you this first. Had you, prior to him reaching out to you telepathically, did you have any kind of prior beliefs or experiences with telepathy or anything like that before?
No.
No.
No. I mean, I think I was a naturally curious person. I think I was fairly open-minded, and I loved reading about sci-fi and, things like that. But it didn't go any further than that, really. I think I read Jonathan Livingston Seagull, if you know that book.
I do. Yeah, I actually listened to Richard Harris narrating it, I think.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah.
It's really good, yeah.
Lovely. No, I mean, that was probably one of my favourite books. But basically, no, I was not prepared for this. Not at all.
I get the sense with I have some social anxiety myself, and I've had a number of experiences throughout my life where strange things have happened. A number of different things which you could consider metaphysical, paranormal, and I wonder about the role of shamans in original societies that would live outside of the village, away from the people, because they had these two. They had the physical self that they'd have to interact with the village, and had this other side of themselves which they would be closer to the forest and the nature, and they commune with the nature spirits or whatever it was. The modern diagnosis of that is mental illness and schizophrenia, but the traditional way, which I would assume went on for much, much longer than our modern psychiatric and psychological sort of sciences, would recognise these individuals as having that feat in both worlds, bridging these two kinds of realities. Is that something you would resonate with?
Absolutely agree wholeheartedly. I mean, I've got this theory, which is going to go into my next book, I think, that if you go back to the hunter-gatherers, when they were not settled anywhere but were moving around, they would have needed outliers. They would have needed people who, it wouldn't have done them any good to just work as a gang of people all walking along together, sort of noses to the ground, carrying on, not knowing which way they should be going. It would need a few people who were going to be outliers, who would go out to the side, climb up the nearest hill, check where the next water supply was, where the herds of animals had gone, where there was food, where there were trees, shelter. And those people would have had a completely different skill set to the bunch who were all walking along together, protecting their elderly, protecting their young, and keeping the whole society together. And I think the skill set of those outliers would have been very, very similar to that of what we'd now call somebody who was autistic. They weren't great at all the small talk and all the sort of mutual support that would have gone on within the group, within the mass of the group, but they had enhanced senses. They had much better hearing and sight and sense of smell and all the abilities that modern day autistics find so difficult. I mean, goodness, Asher walking down a crowded high street, I can remember doing that with him as a kid, and sort of going past a shop that had a load of perfumes and smells sort of wafting out of it, and sort of actually recoiling in horror because it was so overpowering to him, and loud sudden sounds completely threw him into, well, yeah, you get it.
I know. Yeah.
So
crowds, definitely. I could not walk into crowds of people. I can't go in pubs that are full of people. I can't go in clubs that are full of people. It's like,
So, I think those outliers, and then I think, yes, when you're looking at the spiritual needs of the society, you need somebody who can travel in ways that the average person can't, who can see things, be places, be where they can't. And that's what all these young people that Kai has been discovering and working with, that's what they're doing for us, isn't it?
It is.
They are going places that the rest of us can't go. And I mean, when we talked, Asher and I, about putting this into a book, because in his teens, I mooted the idea and he said, "You're not writing a book about my life." Okay. put it aside. But then years later, once we'd started this telepathic communication and he didn't have to use language, he realised he was able to get to me telepathically, and then I was the one who had to write it all down. And I was the one who got to turn it into a book. So he said, yeah, it could work this way because I can send you the gestalt, the whole shebang.
The whole thing together.
Yeah. And you can somehow, because you're quite good at words, you can turn it into something.
Quite good at words.
Something linguistic. Yeah, it's one of the few compliments he's ever paid me, actually. He said when he first got his job, he said, there was several other people went for it. He said, they told me I got it because I had a wide vocabulary. And he said, that's down to you, isn't it? Well, yeah.
He sounds like a great character. He really does. And that thing about small talk, it's funny because I can relate, and also that it's not that you don't care, or that you don't it's you don't even think about it. It's just like, get to the point. Let's get straight into the.
Yeah.
Would you say that's what it is? It's just that, is it? It's just a focus.
It is that. As a child, he would never say please or thank you, and he said, it's so pointless. There's no need to say those things. And so, well, it's, it's a social thing and it makes the other person feel better. It makes them think you're a polite person. But I am. And that is the difference, isn't it? Because they can, he said once to me, if I look at somebody, it's like looking at glass. I can see right into them. I can see he can see what's in your heart, basically. So if something comes out of your mouth, 9 times out of 10 in our society, it isn't exactly what you're thinking.
No.
It's not,
no.
It's been changed a bit, and that might just be politeness, or it might just be to make the other person feel better. But, the old, oh, you look really nice in that, It's just sort of
all of the little groomings and little things we do socially.
That's right. And
yeah,
he just found that so irritating and so stupid. And he said, honestly, I can see what people are thinking, and I just find it. I think that's why. Don't want to sound at all big-headed, but it's why some people get on with autistics, because what you see is what you get with them. I've learned very, very early in this line of work that if I didn't speak truthfully to these kids, if I said something to them that I wasn't thinking, they would not trust me.
Yeah, they know straight away.
End of story. They would absolutely realise I was just one of these people who said one thing, thought another, and they just put me aside. They wouldn't want to know me. And it's only the people who are authentic, the people who actually say, I really enjoy working with you, and they mean it, rather than the ones who are thinking, how long is it till the coffee break? They get it. They know that, and they understand it. I don't say they're reading every single thing that every single person's thinking, but that emotion and speech connection, they understand. And I think that's why a lot of them decided just to be silent, quite honestly. It's easier that way.
Makes loads of sense. So what was the first experience like when he first reached out to you telepathically, sorry?
It wasn't actually him. It was other children in the class first.
Oh, okay.
He I think he stage managed it. I think that's the way to say it. There was 10 of them in the class. As I say, I'd been teaching classes like this with varying, children with varying needs for about 7 years. So I wasn't a newcomer to it. And I'd never seen this happen before. But soon after Ash joined the class, there was this shift. And I thought, something odd is going on here. I don't know what it is. And I'd seen the children playing together, and I could see that they were playing a game like none of my class had ever played before. They all knew what was happening. They were all acting out this story, and it was like it had a script. Everybody knew when it was their turn to come and do this and when it was somebody else's turn, and nobody was fighting over the toys or anything. They just knew exactly what they were doing. I remember thinking, it's like they're telepathically connecting with each other. I can't think of any other reason. And
Really?
yeah, and I thought, better keep quiet about this, because if I go into the staff room and say, hey, guess what? Kids in my class are all just like every other teacher in episode 5 was saying, you know, you really have to watch what you say. But that's the way it was. That's the way it first manifested itself to me. And I think Asher was about 8 when he came up to me one day and waited until a time when there was just me and him in the classroom and said, I think I should tell you that I'm telepathic. I mean, an 8-year-old child. Do you mean you can read my mind? And he just had this little grin on his face. And he watched my face as I sort of took in the full repercussions of that. Oh, good grief. And then this great big grin.
Wow.
And he said, I just thought I ought to mention. So that was the first. And I just made up my mind. I don't think I verbalized it, but I made up my mind. I wanted in on this. I wanted to understand this. And so gradually, you know, one after another, in a mind beyond words, I've sort of gone into stuff, who said what and how it happened and that. But it started quite small, with perhaps me picking up that sense of being stared at that Rupert Sheldrake talks about a lot. And you know, there was one kid who was standing behind me completely out of my line of vision, and I was working with another child, really focusing, but you know, without even turning round, I said to this kid behind me, look, do you think you could just wait a minute? I'm just working with this kid, and, you know, I need to sort her out, and then I'll come and see you. You know, Asher was sitting the other side of the room and saw what happened, realised, and immediately went, Miss got it, Miss got it, Miss got it, everyone. And the whole class started clapping me.
Really?
Oh, I passed a test.
Wow.
And yeah, so that was the first time. And Asher didn't use it as much as some of the others. I had one little boy who used it all the time, and he could do it from all around the school. He could just sort of get messages to me. I'd hear his little voice right in my head. And I knew it was him because it was exactly the way he spoke. And I think, oh, I've got to go and find Max. I've got to go and see what's the matter with Max. And there was always some little problem that he wanted sorting out.
And did you, at what point did you share this with your family?
I don't think I ever did fully.
Really?
Yeah, not completely.
Your husband, your children?
No. I said, you know, that these were interesting children. I said, you know, that Asher was fascinating and all the rest of it. But I don't think it would have been received well.
Really?
And even to this day, I'm no longer with my husband, but the children are all adults now, obviously, and they all remember Asher. They all knew him. They, you know, he used to come around the house a fair bit and so forth. And my youngest in particular, he, you know, he's only a few years older than Ash, so you know, he knew him quite well. And, you know, sometimes played with him and so forth. But I maybe talked to them a little bit about it, but I didn't get a very warm reception. I think they thought that both Asher and I were fairly delusional.
Wow.
I just learned to shut up about it.
And it's quite a hard thing to do, isn't it? I mean, I've struggled with talking to, I mean, you know, it affected my relationship with my ex-wife, talking about some of these things back 28 years ago, whenever it was, when it first started happening. It makes me think of that line from The Matrix, that movie where they said, you know, we live in a world where we live in a prison where that you can't see or touch or smell the bars, you know, and I think that alludes to these walls where these boundaries that are invisible, that such as this, where we can't talk about these things, we're like dissidents, really. That I've used that phrase because I borrowed it from a guy I used to work with in the crop circles. Michael used to say, he used to do these crop circle tea times, and people used to come around. He was sitting towards them about some of the experiences he'd had at the crop circles, and he'd say, when people, you'd see the skeptics in the room that had sort of been dragged along by their wives for a crop circle tour or something, and he said, eventually they'd feel kind of safe, and like dissidents would go, well, actually, I did have an experience once, and then they'd feel comfortable or safe to be able to talk about it. And that really strikes me as where we are with all of this. And
oh, absolutely. And I mean, I've certainly found it since my book came out. I'll go to like my mind, body, spirit fairs and things like that. I'll set up a little stall and have some copies of the book there. And I've got this big banner with, sort of picture of a little boy staring out into some spiritual void somewhere, and all the works. And people will look at the banner and they'll look at my book, and most of them will just walk on past and not be interested. But the ones that come in, they're drawn by some sort of magnetism, and they'll just walk up and they'll go, tell me about this. And I'll tell them very briefly, what it's about. And they'll go, yeah, I believe you, because I've had this experience. And then all the stories pour out. And I've had everything from sort of little old ladies with a dog in the handbag to, burly students and everything in between, just ordinary people off the street. But they'll come up and they'll say, yeah, I've had this experience and I've had that experience. And yeah, I used to work with people in a sort of special facility for whatever. And he could definitely get across to me, and more and more of them. And, now the book's published, I'll get people writing to me. I usually get 3 or 4 a week, just sort of writing and saying, oh, I'm so glad to have found you. I've seen this, or I've heard this, or this has happened to me. And you're giving me permission to tell my story.
Oh, yeah, that was exactly
what it all comes down to.
You're giving me permission to let the light out, as it were.
Yeah, and I can so relate to them because I spent so many years not sharing my story with anybody.
Even now, after all these years, I still cringe inside when I say some things, and there's so many things I haven't told people, and said to, that my teacher was actually the guy that took me to the crop circles initially, said, be very careful with who you share this stuff with, because they'll try and take it away from you. That whole thing about being made to feel delusional, doubt yourself, it's really destructive. And I've seen myself vacillate and the damage it's done to me by losing confidence in my own experiences.
Yeah.
It's been a big lesson to me.
Oh, that certainly is something that Ash would relate to. And he really, really felt that strongly, especially when this doctor said, oh, these delusions you're getting, that's just a symptom of Asperger's syndrome. That's part of what you get. And, when you're a 16-year-old and you're very shy and you're very withdrawn anyway, and some guy in a white coat with all these letters after his name tells you that, you believe it.
You believe it.
Yeah.
And it's the same as I watched a podcast recently where he was talking about our reliance on experts in so many fields, whether it's nutrition or whatever it is. The example that was given was a doctor, and he said, I had a lady come to me who said, I watched a podcast, she said, and it told me that I need to eat 30 plants a week so that I can keep the right amount of gut microbiome. She said, but I've been doing it for a few weeks and I don't really feel very good, but I've got to keep doing it because this is what this doctor said. And then he said, well, what, if you don't really feel very good, then you're not really listening to yourself. So let's cut the 30 plants out and we'll do 5 and we'll see how you feel with those. And then we'll do another few and then we'll see, and we'll find the ones that work for you because you're individual and everybody's different and one size doesn't fit all. And basically this doctor was giving this person their own power back to say, you be the best judge of and that's what a lot of people need, I think, in so many areas. Would you agree?
I think so too. I think that the experts just sort of pack their bags and move out. It's going to be so much better. I mean, I'm not saying there aren't
There are uses.
wonderful doctors and
Sure.
wonderful, experts in all sorts of fields who can do things that we can't do for ourselves. If I had certain medical problems, then I'd probably go to a doctor. But
absolutely.
other medical problems, I wouldn't go near a doctor with.
No.
I'd go to somebody who was tuned into, shiatsu or acupuncture or something that, might treat it in a completely different way. So, I like to hedge my bets, if you like. But no, I think this whole thing, we've been bamboozled into it for so long, haven't we, that we know best.
We know best.
We are the authority and we know it all. And you are just, poor little people, because I've got all these letters after my name and I've studied it. But they've only studied what other people tell them.
Exactly.
And it's just been, just like I did when I was doing my degree.
Yeah.
I was studying what other people said. And it took me another 14 years, say, in the job to actually think, no, what they were telling me was mostly wrong. And these children have got completely different ways of learning. And I'm still learning.
And it won't stop, will it? It's the same with politicians. I want to see the day when they stand up and say, we haven't got all the answers. We've got a couple of ideas. We thought we might try this and see how that goes. And have you got any ideas? What do you think? And maybe we can.
Yeah.
I wonder if we'll ever see it. It would be nice if we do.
Wouldn't it be lovely?
Humility. Yeah.
Yes. But you know what? If we all learn telepathy, they are going to have a very sharp learning curve, aren't they? Because if everybody can pick up what they're actually thinking, that's going to really put the cat amongst the pigeons.
I interviewed a lady called Veronica Goodchild, and she wrote a book called Songlines for the Soul. She's a PhD Jungian psychologist who wrote this book about crop circles, and took her 10 years to write. It's obviously very intelligent. She had a lot of her own experience as well. Really grounded lady, a really intelligent lady. And we took the songlines aspect reminds me of the stories of dream time of the Aborigines. This whole thing about maps, like you mentioned earlier, the hunter-gatherers would know where to get food, where to get shelter, and there would be stories that were passed down through accumulated knowledge to keep going on. But we talked about this age of Aquarius scenario and us, as a model for our evolution, let's say, moving from one age to the other. If it's Indians, it would be the Kali Yuga going into the next Yuga, let's say. And we talked about this issue of deception. I did a presentation on deception because some of the messages in crop circles have been, we oppose deception. And they've been done in a number of ways, in binary code that has to be deciphered, or has been an ancient post-Augustan Latin language from the 12th century that was written in script. And when we deciphered it, it was we oppose acts of craft and cunning, which kind of amounts to the same thing.
Yeah.
And then, Houston telling Katie, you can't do these things unless you tell the truth, And so, when I studied linguistics at university, I was very interested in propaganda. I was very interested in how people are brainwashed into thinking and behaving ways where they think they know their own minds, but they don't really. They've been programmed to respond in certain ways. I was very interested in the power of that and how that all happened. And so, unconsciously, many people have got layers of deception within them that's been programmed into them, where they picked up this information from. Unconsciously, they know that they have to put on a face and sort of present certain faces to the world and act deceptively in order to get along. And so we have layers and layers and layers of deception that we all kind of swim around in, which I think prevents us from being able to just be open and communicate telepathically.
Yeah.
Is that about right?
Yeah. No, in fact, a lot of the stuff, I'm about a quarter of the way through our next book now. Asher and I are 100% through it because I've got all the notes of all the stuff I write down from all the transcripts of our telepathic discussions. And then I've just got the little job of taking this teetering pile of notebooks and turning them into connected text. But the way he has explained it is that we start off being born and we're still spirit, because, we've come from another place to incarnate into the human body. And now we've got this brand new little pink brown skin suit that we're wearing, and it's, all nice and shiny and new. And a little baby, they're still loving the learning, and it's all new experience, and their little eyes are all full of wonder and amazement, and it's all a big game. But soon the socialization kicks in, and soon they're taught, and not with any malice, but just in terms of parents trying to get them to fit into the norm. They're given all of these little subliminal messages about, this is okay to do, but that's not so good to do. And no, I know you think you've got a pretend friend over there, your imaginary friend, but actually it's a fib, isn't it? It's not really true. I mean, the parents can tell them all about Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny, and that's accepted lying. But if they tell you they're talking to the great-grandfather who has passed long before they were born, and that he keeps coming and visiting, and it's that man in the photo, mummy, they're just like,
don't be silly.
Don't tell me stories like that, because it's naughty to tell fibs, isn't it? And gradually they learn not to do it. They just learn to cut that stuff out. And by the time they get to 3, 4, 5, 6, they're more or less socialized into. Ash has got this wonderful theory. He says, if you imagine our brain is like a filter, and we've got all these little holes where, he calls it, the light can get in, but stuff from other realms can get in, that we all get little, nearly all of us get little sort of nudges and synchronicities and intuitions and things, and that's sort of the light getting in. If you're autistic, you've got blooming great holes and loads of light can get in. There's so much
must be
getting
overwhelming
in that you probably can't live a fully autonomous life, and you've probably got to have carers helping you with the day-to-day stuff. You're not going to be able to go down to the shopping mall and buy your new socks and cook your meals and all the rest of it. You're going to need some help, because you've got so much of this stuff coming in. But what he's saying is that he said you get 2 types of society, and one lot of societies are like that filter, and all the socialization is like being in a hard water place. If you've got a water filter and it's hard water and you get lime scale building up on it. Whereas if you're in a place that's got soft water, and he's saying not industrial societies, not post-industrial societies, but perhaps an indigenous culture somewhere that still does have a shamanic tradition and, sort of stories going way back, and, sort of primary cultures and stuff, they still let the light in because they're not being programmed out of it. But for people in our society, it's gradually getting clogged up. And I think that's quite similar to what you were describing, just a different analogy for it.
Yeah, I think it amounts to the same thing, doesn't it? I mean, society tells us, particularly the material society, that sort of, it lends itself well, doesn't it? The English language is a language of merchants. It's a language of things.
That's a very good point.
It's not like Navajo, which is a language of change. So, I'm sure you know this, but in Navajo, someone wouldn't be wearing a shirt; they would be shirting. And if you look at Chinese language, they have this language that's head-based, and also language that's heart-based, that's mixed in with it. So Taoism originally had, these kinds of. So when we try to translate something from Chinese into English, we don't have the same framework for it, because everything is based on the head. And it rules the heart then.
Yes.
Through language.
We're taught to suppress anything that comes from below the throat, aren't we? It's all got to be head stuff. And
you've got to grow up, and
it's not a good balance. Yes, be sensible and be
sensible,
logical.
The real world. Yeah.
Mm.
So these are. Have you read Aldous Huxley's Island? The Island.
I haven't, no,
It's a
but I'm a great Huxley fan,
well,
so that's
it's a
probably.
classic. It's about an island full of gifted people that were left alone from society. Aldous Huxley's The Island. Very good book. It's not a very big book, but yeah, it's fictional. But Aldous Huxley was obviously onto something, and it's along the lines of what we're discussing here, and it really strikes a chord in so many ways because there's all sorts of healers and people with different gifts on this island, and then there are greedy corporatists who want to take the island because there's oil underneath it, and there's a major, and it's fictional, as I say, but
Yeah,
he obviously knew what he was talking about.
quite allegorical at the same time.
Absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely. What else have I got now? I've got so many things I want to ask you. We could be talking for hours. What was it like for you to shift from traditional communication methods to these telepathic exchanges? You seem to have, from what you said so far, you seem to have sort of adapted quite well to it. So you obviously had an aptitude that you didn't know about. Would you say that's about right?
Yeah, that's very much about right. It took me a very, very long time to trust what I was getting. The stuff that was going on in my classroom way back was fairly easy because it was fairly self-evident. You know, if I've got some little voice going on in my head saying, miss, I'm help with this, or there's a fight here, can you come and sort it out or something, then I would react and that would be okay. But the stuff with Asher is more abstract, and he dealt with it in a different way. I'd say he's definitely my teacher now. The whole teacher-pupil thing has turned on its head, and it did a long time ago. But when he decided we were going to start working telepathically, he didn't tell me this. He didn't say, right, from now on, I'm not going to talk to you physically. I'm just going to talk to you metaphysically. Get used to it. I didn't get anything like that. As far as I was concerned, he'd just more or less cut off communication. I'd get the odd text once a week, and that was it. And I was, a bit like, oh, this is a shame, I miss this. But somebody had advised me a long time ago. I spoke to a lovely lady in New York who was a channel for this sort of disembodied guys and had a lot of wisdom. Really, really amazing stuff came through this lady. And they had told me through her that the reason Asher and I had chosen to be together in this lifetime, to spend time together in this lifetime, was that we were going to work with telepathy. And they actually said, you've done this in a prior lifetime and you've decided it worked quite well, so you're going to do it again. And they said, you're going to receive messages from him telepathically, and when he's not speaking to you, that's when the telepathy will be coming in, and you've got to listen out for it and feel for it, and then you'll pick it up and you'll be able to do it. And that's easy to say, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I was going to say, so I mean, meditation has been the hardest thing for me. I really do struggle with it. I'm much better at, so for example, when you mentioned earlier about when you're in that place, you need care. So it threw me back to this afternoon, let's say. So I do a lot of sort of martial arts stuff, but with a stick, and I try to feel and not think. When you're sending your body instructions to move in a spiral and move in circles, or telling your body to do certain things, you're working in language and you're not in the right place. But when you, to use Bruce Lee's euphemism, feeling, not thinking, and you're just feeling your interior perception of your body, you lose track of time and you go into another place. And, and so I do that with this, usually with a stick, with a staff, and I usually, then I'll drum. And both of them use this left-right brain. It was something I was talking about with Diane last week. It's this. And then when I'm coming down off of that, let's say, as if I've taken some kind of psychedelic in a way, mild psychedelic, I would say, then I'll come up and start preparing dinner, and I'll find I've got things out of the cupboard and I'll go, where did that come from? But I've obviously got it out of the cupboard along with some other things I've got out, and completely, because I'm somewhere else. And my ex-wife used to say, "You're not aware of your surroundings." And that's kind of where you go when you're in this place, isn't it? And so I'm thinking about Elizabeth, what was her name? The lady who wrote Eat, Pray, Love. I can't remember the author's name at
Oh,
the moment.
yeah, I know the what you mean, yeah.
Yeah, Julia Roberts played it in the film.
Yeah.
She talked about the muse, and she said, that she gave stories about famous musicians who would be driving along the road, and then a tune would start coming out of the ether into their mind, and they'd be going like, "Oh, give me a break! Can't you see I'm driving? I've got to pull over and try and write this down, because if you
Yeah.
don't, you forget it. It's like a
Yeah.
dream." And this is a long way of me saying, how did you begin to train yourself to stop the thinking, to get yourself out of your own way to receive these messages?
I suppose there was a crux point at which I was so angry with myself that I wasn't getting anything. And I knew, and it wasn't an intellectual knowing, I knew in my heart that our conversation wasn't over, that we'd just been getting to the interesting bit. And then he'd stopped. And I thought, there's more there. There's something coming in, and I don't know what it is, and it's driving me crazy. And so I just sat down one day and I wrote at the computer, and I just poured out onto this Word document all my frustrations and feelings and disappointment and anger, really. Not anger at him, but anger that, we'd been really getting to something. He was now into adulthood. He was, got a good enough vocabulary that we could talk about these things. And, if he was going to do this telepathy, why wasn't I picking it up? And at that moment, when I was feeling at my absolute lowest, I got this unmistakable message came into my mind saying, "Feel into my heart." And I knew it came from Asher. And so I sat there and shut my eyes and did my level best to feel into his heart. And I got an image with my eyes shut of something like a monk's cell, a little stone building, stone room, very small. I could see a window up high in the wall so you could see the sky, but you couldn't see anything else. And there was a table in this room. And on the table there was a pen, one of those old-fashioned dip pens that you had to dip into ink, and there was an ink bottle, and the bottle was empty. And there weren't any sounds, there weren't any words. I suppose there must have been paper on the table, I can't remember that bit, but I noticed this empty ink bottle, and I just got this gut feeling, you've got to put ink, give me ink for my pen. And so I was still at the computer. I opened my eyes and I wrote down all the things that I'd just seen in this kind of visiony thing. And the words that came back to me were, "Do it." I thought, "Oh, that's pure Ashy." So, what are you fuffing around for? Get on. And it was that moment that I thought, I've got to start believing that I am getting this stuff, because so often I'd think I was getting something and then I just think, this is just wishful thinking. I'd love to connect with him again. So I probably made it up. But then I thought, I didn't make that up. So that was my moment of realising.
Is that the difference? Is that the difference between you believing it and having the confidence that that you're not imagining it? Is that the difference?
Yeah, and it took me, God, in total, from the first time I was told this by the lady in New York, it took me 10 years to really trust that he was contacting me that way. I mean, we had telepathic connection, but it was kind of like we both know we were doing it. It was almost like we did a lot of remote viewing we went through good couple of years of every week doing a remote viewing exercise. We were both doing it, and at that time we were still in verbal or at least written communication. And so, I'd get instant feedback. I'd know that he was picking up, exactly where I was standing, and he was drawing me diagrams of it, writing down what I was seeing. And we'd done that for ages, and, that was fine. But this was different because I didn't have that backup from physical him. If I said to physical him, hey, I just got this message from you telepathically. Did you send it? I just wouldn't get a response.
Really?
Mm.
He really wanted you to stand on your own 2 feet.
Yeah. No, he's a very
Wow.
calculating gentleman. He was not one to give me an easy ride. So,
God, it sounds like my teacher, the guy who took me to the crop circles. He would do those sorts of things.
oh, really?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
the first thing he did when he first took me to the first crop circle was laid me down, shut my eyes, and then I went into a visionary state and saw the crop going down in different directions, sort of laying over each other really fast. And it was shocking to me because it was quite immediate that I saw this vista in my mind, and woke up and as I looked into his eyes, he had this big smile on his face. And I said, it goes down really fast, doesn't it? And he didn't say anything, just smiled at me, as if he knew. And I was like, because then it gets you going, because you think, well, what does he know? Why isn't he telling me stuff? Why is he making me? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the old Socratic method, isn't it?
Yeah.
They just ask the right questions and leave you to find the answers, but they're never going to teach you. And that's the difference, what we were talking earlier with the experts, isn't it? I mean, they've learned by listening to people, making all the notes, writing it all down, and then
memorizing it and passing it in a test.
And then regurgitating the whole thing for their test, and then they get their full marks and flying colours. And
at the same time telling people that they need to develop critical thinking when they're not doing it themselves.
Oh, yeah.
But when you're not given the answers and you have to reach that halfway, a good teacher, in my view, does that bit where they facilitate you reaching over to make the answers and get them for yourself, because then you never forget them. You don't have to cram them for a test.
Exactly, because you've done the learning. You've done the actual process.
Right.
Do you know, I once had a class of 10, 11-year-olds. They were in their last year of primary school, and I always used to feel, teaching that top class just before they went off to secondary school, that I owed it to them to, give them a good way of sort of really thinking for themselves and actually doing that critical thinking bit. And one time I sat this bunch of kids down and I said, tell me something. I said, would you like to grow up just like your mums and dads? And then I shut up, and they all sat there and they all looked around at each other, and they had this look of absolute horror on their face, like sort of damned if I do and damned if I don't. What on earth do I answer? And they knew me well enough to know I didn't have an agenda. I was just asking them to think for themselves. Would you like to grow up like your mums and dads? And then one kid put their hand up and said, no. And I said, okay, go on. And they said, well, I mean, my mum and dad are absolutely great. I love them to bits. But if we grew up like our mums and dads, the world wouldn't move on, would it? And this was a 10-year-old kid said that. And as soon as they'd spoken, the rest of the class also breathed this collective sigh of relief. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's it. And, it wasn't that they were dissing mum and dad and thinking, oh, I want to be better than them. It wasn't that at all. It was just that mum and dad have done this great job. They're doing this great job, but we can go take it that bit further. We've got to move the world on. And I mean, this was years ago. This was in the early 2000s. And I just never forgot that child and that response. So I thought,
I always told my children, you're the new improved version. You're the next model, you're 2.0 or the next one. So, you're going to learn most of the things off me, but the things that you shouldn't do. So I'm going to be your B teacher, not your A teacher. You know, the things I'll ask you, this is what I'm teaching you. You probably ignore that, but the things that you pick up.
I love it.
The realms.
Yeah.
Can you describe what they are and how they kind of relate to reality from your experiences of going there now with Asher? Or how would you?
Well, first off, I don't go there.
Okay.
Asher goes there,
Asher goes there.
he contacts me from there
Okay.
and gives me. So although I have quite a wide-ranging knowledge of it, it's all vicarious. It's all second-hand.
Okay.
So he is the expert there. He says it's not a place because it's outside of time and space. So there's not going to be a place and there's no time there. He says in the realms, everything is instantaneous. You know, the sort of manifesting thing that we've been learning on Earth over the last sort of 20, 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
He said, when you're in the realms, everything happens at the speed of thought, which isn't speed at all, because as soon as you get into your head, you know, you'd like this to happen, you'd like that to happen. And he has actually shown me once. I did kind of experience that through one of these visiony things, which we've taken to calling astral envelopes. I don't know, you know, it's just a term we've made up, which is kind of the Gestalt thing he sends me. He doesn't send me strings of words so much as a whole living
do you get the smells
experience.
Like they said like if you someone, I think it was Caroline, said if you think of Christmas then you get the whole thing. You get the smell of turkey and the tree and the I don't know if it's smell.
I don't know if I've ever had smells, but I've certainly had the whole experience. Yes, I mean it is like that. You get the whole idea of what this place feels like. You get the space of it. You get the colours and you get the sounds if there are sounds, and the whole, what's it called, proprioceptive or something, the whole sort of body moving in certain directions, even though I'm just sitting on my bed, you know, sort of taking this stuff in. So the way I was shown it on that occasion was that I wasn't exactly walking around. I was kind of doing something like walking, you know, my legs were sort of going forward, but it was almost like I was floating a foot or so above, if there was a sort of ground, but I was sort of just floating above it. So there wasn't any effort involved in taking footsteps, if you like. And the feeling was of walking along or walking through a sort of very extensive grassy area. And then I suppose the thought came into my mind, I don't know which way to go. And instantaneously I had this, you know, like rose arbors where you've got kind of construction of sticks that goes up and they have climbing roses.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Those things. And like a tunnel like that. And as I sort of thought, I want to know which way to go, I'd got this sort of tunnel of sticks or plants or something that I was sort of walking through. And then I sort of thought, I wonder if there's any water here. And suddenly there's a great big lake. So everything that
very
just
dreamlike, isn't it?
Yeah, it was. But I was, you know, I was definitely not asleep. This was all stuff that Asher was sending to me.
Wow.
And it was that whole idea that, you know, if I decided there was going to be a herd of purple elephants, then there would have been a herd of purple elephants there, because I would have created them with my thoughts, because that's what you're doing there all the time.
Wow.
So, yeah, that's the kind of thing. And he said that's what people come to planet Earth with as babies, that ability to pull in anything just instantly. And then suddenly they find, because we're in 3D and we have time, there's a time lag, you know, and you've got to wait for something to happen. You can suddenly decide you want milk or you want, you know, cuddles or whatever it is, but they don't come just instantaneously. You've actually got to wait for it. And
so physical reality literally is on so many levels a slowed down version of what primary consciousness really is.
Yeah, if you think of frequency, sound frequency, where you've got your very high notes, which, you know, and then you've got your really low, slow notes, and that is where we're at. And I know when Asher and I first started doing this work, he said to me, "Why are you so slow?" And I said, "Well, we're having these thought conversations instantaneously." But I said, "I know when we're finished, I'm going to have forgotten 90% of it. So I'm writing it all down in a book, and I'm writing as fast as I can, but I'm noting both sides of the conversation. And it's going to take me a while." And he was like, "Oh, okay, right. Well, if that's the way it's got to be, that's the way it's got to be."
It's like if I let's say I take some effort to really like think about how I want to articulate a particularly difficult concept to explain to somebody. Usually when I'm trying to teach somebody something or explain something which is, let's say, like explaining like a psychedelic experience, which is also very difficult to explain, you know, something that you've had in a dream or something that you've seen like that. If I take a lot of time to sort of like really think carefully about how I'm going to articulate it, and then I articulate it, it's like Diane said, the trouble with language is it can have so many different layers of meaning. The words and the way it will come out of you and what you mean to say goes into them and their frame of reference, you know,
Totally different. Yeah.
You know, if I say school, I've got the image of my school in my mind, but they've got the image of their school in their mind, which might be, and so there's all these possibilities for mistranslation. And when I find that what I feel is a really good piece of communication that I've said to somebody, and then you realise that they haven't understood half of what you've said, I get really frustrated.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
That's the sense I'm getting from what you're telling me, that Asher and...
Well, that's why I say he's post-linguistic. He's learnt all the language. He's gone through all of those hoops, and he came out the other side with flying colours, full marks. But in this way, the importance, he can still talk, and he still does talk for, you know, the basics, because words like lamppost and table and frog are very useful in terms of identifying a specific thing that we all recognise. You know, if I say frog, you know what a frog is, and I know what a frog is, and so it's easy rather than trying to go all around the houses and describe it in other ways. But when you're trying to describe something like energy, something like dimensions, something like the realms, then you're in a whole different ball game, and you haven't got words that will do. You've got some words, and a lot of them are tied up with specific religions, and that's going to draw in some people, and it's going to exclude other people and make them turn off straight away. So if I say a word like soul, there will be people who also say, "Oh, soul, right, okay, now I know what she's talking about." And there will be other people who go, oh, she's on about souls, it's one of them.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
It's a difficult... I know Robert Monroe went through this sort of huge thing of trying to de-religionize everything that he said in all his out-of-body books, you know, which means that every book has this huge glossary of all these new terms he'd come up with, and you have to keep on sort of going back to the glossary to find out what he means by this, that, or the other. He's coined this whole new vocabulary which is fair enough. I could see where he was coming from, but it makes reading them quite tough. But,
and that was all to stop people running away, because it's the Jeffrey Crypower said, well, if you want to end a conversation, just bring up religion, really. And people will start, you know. It's true,
I know.
isn't it?
I mean, it is. It's very divisive, and, you know, I don't have strong feelings of one way or the other myself, but, you know, I can see both camps, and I can see why both camps are the way they are. But, you know, it is something different somehow, and all of this it's just getting into that sort of liminal area where there isn't language for it. And because that's the stuff Ash wants to talk to me about, he just gets really, really irritated and says, "Oh, words they're like little tiny boxes. They just limit everything, and they make it so look, I've got a lovely quote here. Thought is a bird." This is Khalil Gibran.
Oh, yeah.
thought is a bird of space that in a cage of words may indeed unfold its wings but cannot fly.
Yes, I've heard that before recently as well. It's perfect, isn't it?
It is. It absolutely sums up the way Asher feels. Yeah, okay, he's got a cage of words and he can unfold his wings, he can use words, but he can't fly with them. And I do wonder with these spellers, they're doing an amazing thing because they've not been heard for all these years. I mean, some of them into their 20s before they've actually found a way of communicating. And I've got a friend myself who's a non-speaker. She's in her 30s and she has no way. She has a body that does not work for her well enough even to use a spelling device, or not one that she's managed to find. And apart from telepathy, she has no other way of communicating her desires, her needs. She's treated in the environment that she's in like she's a toddler.
Yeah.
And she has a mind the size of a planet. She's so
That
wise,
must be
so
so
wonderful,
difficult.
and it's just awful for her. So, yeah, I mean, I can see that spelling is fantastic for these people and that their ability to do that is amazing. I think, take them 10, 20 years down the line, they're going to find that words still aren't enough, that they've got words to convince people there's somebody in here, there's somebody intelligent here, there's somebody amazing here, but the words they can use are going to be constricted either by the
limitation of words.
and the environment they've been brought up in, so, they will talk about angels, or they'll talk about spirit, or they'll talk about whatever it is that are the only words that they can use. And I've had loads and loads of conversations with Asher where he's sort of said things like, well, I suppose I'll use the word energy. It isn't anywhere close to what I want, but it's the nearest word I can come to what I want to express. And that's why he's left it all up to me. So I've got to find the words now.
So a few things that came to my mind as you were saying those things. So we have a phrase in martial arts where you, particularly it's the internal martial arts, it's this Tai Chi, Bagua, it's these principles that you're trying to get from the principles of creation that exist within you. You're trying to tap into them. It's deep and it's whatever, but it's mostly based on the way your body moves, like spirals and stuff like that. And you're trying to, not think, and language gets in the way. So one of the things we do is you learn the simple steps, the simple basic steps, and then you complexify that simplicity until the point when you then simplify the complexity. You get to the point where you go back. And so as you were saying that about learning these basic steps of words that Asher's had to learn, and then you get more complex with the language, but then to go back to the simplicity of what he's gone back to, what he's began this journey of, he's got to go back to telepathy. I'm not articulating what I want to say properly here.
No, I'm getting you. Do
you understand what I mean? Yeah, there's this kind of, it flips back on its head. So, and language is, another friend of mine who's been on the show, Scott Onstott, he's written a book on sacred geometry and philosophy, come up with this brilliant way of looking at language, saying it's a map that points to consciousness.
Right.
So apple is an apple in English, and it's manzana in Spanish. They're both an apple, and they both point to this platonic ideal realm of what is an apple in our consciousness, but they're just sounds that point to it. I like that.
Yeah, that's good.
But if I say sweet, if I say I've just eaten a strawberry and you've never eaten a strawberry, and I say this is sweet, and you go, oh, well, it's like honey. No, it's not like honey. And I go, oh, it's like sugar. No, it's not like sugar. I can't give you that sense of what a strawberry sweetness is like unless you eat it.
Yeah.
In the phenomenological sense.
Yes. And that is exactly where these guys are at when they talk about going to the hill or going to the realms or, experiencing all the things they're experiencing. There just aren't words to describe it.
Describe it.
No.
And does Asher, that was my next question, does Asher go to the hill with the others, or has he been,
He hasn't really said that he does. I mean, he's not a sort of fully fledged non-speaker. He says he's a kind of bridge person. When we started on the book, he said and I didn't know any of these people at that time. That was before I'd met this friend I was talking about just now. It was before I'd ever encountered a fully non-speaking human being in personal terms.
Right.
And he said there are people who can't express themselves, who can't tell the rest of the world what's going on. And we owe it to them to put it into a book so that their carers, their parents, other people, they themselves can find this, so that parents can look at their children and say, this is what, the children will say, this is what I can do. And of course, Kai's now done it with bells and whistles on. She's really, really opened the box to it.
I've yet to speak to Kai. I'm hoping that's going to happen soon.
No, magic.
She is. I'm really impressed with what she's done so far. I like the way that she's gone about this whole project to do the podcast first. It's really smart. She's obviously a very smart person. Has Asher talked about what's happening now with the telepathy tapes and where he sees this going in terms of all of our understanding of?
He said that, because I asked him actually a week or two ago, I said, are we at a tipping point now, or is this just going to be, I think it was Caroline who expressed it that way when we were chatting a while back. She said, is this going to be a flash in a pan where everybody suddenly gets into it, and for a year or so it's like a big buzzword, and then everybody just forgets about it and we go back to normal? Or is this actually a moving on point? And I asked Asher that, and he said, this is a tipping point. He said, we needed to get humanity as a whole to the stage where they could accept this before it went public. And we've been working behind the scenes. The non-speakers have been working at a far stronger level than he has, because they've got all day to do it. I mean, he has to hold down a job. He has to go to work and come back. So he's got more limitations on him than somebody who is being completely cared for and just has all day to focus on lifting humanity up to this level.
Wow.
And helping them. So those are the real heroes, if you like. They are amazing people. Asher and I have got our purpose because we're here as a kind of in-between stage. We're like the sort of stepping stone that will take us into them. But he said humanity is now at a level. People are believing it who wouldn't have done perhaps 5-10 years ago. People are suddenly tuning in, and it's a combination of Kai's electric personality and her amazing way of portraying it, and the fact that our book came out just a few months before the telepathy tapes, and I didn't know Kai at that time. I didn't know anything about her, and she didn't know anything about me. And then, find other people who've been doing similar things. I mean, Katie Asher and Houston have written a book, and, there's a whole load of different stuff all turning up at the same time. And he said, we're not quite there yet, but we are right on the tipping point. He said it was like a seesaw, and you've walked up the seesaw and you're standing on that centre point, and one more step and it's going to tip over and you're going to be going down into the... Yeah, which is a lovely
fantastic
idea.
Yeah, that is a lovely idea. I think that's probably a great place to leave it on, actually. We're at an hour and a half. I don't want to go on too long because it puts people off, but that's probably a great place to leave it, with hope that we're at that centre point, the fulcrum of the seesaw, and we're ploughing forward. Thank you. Jess, thanks so much for coming on. I'm gonna the next step for me is your book is in my basket on Amazon, ready for me to press the button.
Oh.
I'm going to read that. It'd be nice to meet you at some point in the future, since you're not too far down the road from me. So at some point we'll probably meet up. I was contacted by somebody called Ellie recently, who wants to meet up. She says she knows you. She works with
I
children.
know Ellie. Yes, she does. Yes, she does work with special needs kids. Yeah. Oh, she's a lovely kid. Yeah.
Yeah, she sounds very nice. She's just signing up to do because I've expressed an interest to try and learn the spelling system, and she wants to do it.
She wants to do that as well. Yes, she does. Oh, lovely. Oh, that's a nice connection.
Yeah,
Good.
it is. So thanks very much for joining me, and hopefully I'll see you again soon.
Bless you, Gary. It's been a real pleasure chatting to you. Thank you.
Thank you.